those public safety employees was higher, but we weren't to touch Measure U to pay for it because those officers belong to general fund, so why would Measure U pay for it? So that increased the cost on the general fund side.
And I appreciate you walking us through that, and I think in my estimation, that's kind of the root issue that Carly and Michael, and I have to agree, and I can recall that budget discussion, and I remember really being on the cusp of which way I wanted to go, and thinking that because it was the first year, and yes, we were realizing a surplus, we had no assurance that that was going to be continued, and so for that reason I opted for a different approach to balancing. But I just pulled up the resolution 4703 again, and in item 3A, there's a very lengthy paragraph that defines all the things that could legitimately be paid for through Measure U funds. And I'm not questioning any assessment right now, but I guess my gut feeling is that there are things defined in this section of the resolution that are not being paid for out of Measure U. And so I think from my estimation, that's one of the first places we need to look. And I understand that there's differences of opinion, particularly in the public, about pre and post public safety personnel and expenses and all that. And I think, to use Michael's phrase, we're overthinking it and making it more complex than we need to. To me, public safety is public safety. We have two public safety departments. We have very predictable expenditures for operating those departments. And then there's other things that are defined in the resolution that are reasonable general fund expenditures that support the public safety operations. So, and I'm not going to ask you to try to get into the weeds on that right now, but I think philosophically we need to take a really close look at the resolution and make sure that we're doing our due diligence to allocate every possible public safety expenditure to the Measure U. And I'd be curious to see what that does with the percentages. I understand the other parts of the budgetary issues are not going to be entirely addressed by that, but I think that's one of the places that I think we should start.
I think we're doing a disservice to our employees on the public safety side by saying you're pre-Measure U and you're post-Measure U, and you can't use any pre-Measure. If you're pre-Measure U, you can't be the beneficiary of any of those funds. I think that's ridiculous, and I think that does a disservice to our staff.
Well, and it does a disservice to our citizens when we don't have money to pave roads because we're squeezing everything out of every other department and saving the Measure U money for something magical. It's not in the resolution, by the way, the savings portion.
One of the challenges that we're experiencing, particularly right now, is in community development. We've got an uptick in development activity and even people that are just inquiring about potential opportunities. And so we don't have the staffing capacity to upstaff, so oftentimes they'll have to wait. They'll have to wait in line because of that. And so we haven't had to delay any sort of items to the Planning Commission as in 2019, but as a result of the uptick that we're seeing, we're having to, push people out, which is creating those issues because we don't have the budget in community development. But that's one of the prime areas where revenues will increase for the city of Hemet. So it's a challenge. It's a battle that we have day in and day out. Community development keeps me apprised of it, but I know that we're trying to come up with as many innovative solutions as we can, but innovative solutions only go so far, and sometimes, you just need more staff to deal with that.
Well, if I can recall, Carly and I have been pushing that for the last 3 years, that it needs to be done in a way that doesn't isn't to the detriment of the rest of the city. And if we can't hire staff, if our staff currently in community development and counter staff can't get our customers, our citizens, through the process to get businesses up and going and projects built, we're just leaving money on the table because they're going to leave and go to our competitor on the other side of Esplanade because they can get through the process. They can get through it quickly. They're able to get projects through and done in a timely manner that's not breaking the bank for people. We need to be able to let people know, hey, we're open for business, and we want you to come to our city, and we're going to make it easy for you, and we want you to run your business because ultimately that's going to raise tax dollars. And then we won't have those budget problems, revenue problems, because we'll have more business and more people being able to spend money in the city. That's my 10 cents.
Linda, anything further? Carly? Okay, well, we really do appreciate as Linda put it, sobering walk through this. And I think some good comments were raised by council, and we look forward to seeing how we can incorporate some of those suggestions when we get into our.
What is our next step on this? Because, I mean, we're going to look at this, and then what?
So I'm not asking for any sort of direction. If the council wanted to give any direction on this, happy to take it. I should also add that as discussions continue to occur with respect to whether they're capital purchases, I know that I included some narrative in the next item, but as those purchases, whether the council chooses to move forward on it or not, whenever we have additions of personnel or additional purchases in the future, we will make sure to update this accordingly so that we have a model that we can keep up to date and freshen up and liven up as we need it. So as we continue to move forward, we'll keep updating this model.
I would hope that you have enough information based on the conversation here today on how a budget proposal would look coming forward.
I think I heard pretty clear some of the items with respect to Resolution 4703 and 4731, some of the items that are listed in those resolutions to potentially be utilized to be covered by Measure U and any upcoming budget for fiscal year 2020-2021. Is that correct?
No, I don't think that's correct. I think that you have a budget report coming up with mid-year adjustments that need to happen. And I think that I would like to see a proposal right now. We need to fix this year.
For fiscal year 1920 or fiscal year 2020?
2021.
So we won't be able to...
1920, I'm sorry.
So fiscal year 1920, there will be some minor adjustments, mid-year adjustments. But in terms of this budget year being balanced, this budget year is currently balanced.
But I would like to see some sort of in your mid-year adjustments, something that we are going to use some of our Measure U money for public safety this year.
So
because there are other things in the city that need to be done, and we are getting pounded on it every single day.
So when it comes to some of the additional appropriations that we'll need
I mean, at least you can give us the option.
Yeah, we can go ahead and package that up.
Yeah, I think following that, what I'm sensing is at least a consensus of direction, if you will, to try to take that. So if we can do it sooner than later.
Because, I mean, some of the potholes in our roads are bigger than my tire on my truck. And it's embarrassing. I mean, people call all the time.
So I don't know that we have any adjustments on the CIP or public works side.
But I'm just saying, since we're sucking all the money and putting it into public safety, maybe we could put some of it, cover some of the public safety stuff and reduce our percentage back down to where it should be.
Some of the items that, or at least one of the items will include the addition of a personnel individual and HR to help with some of the recruitments that we have primarily on the public safety side.
But we need to free up some funding for some infrastructure improvements.
We'll package it up so that we can have that conversation in February.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I appreciate that. Appreciate the input, Council. Thank you again, Lorena.
Thank you, Council.
That takes us to item 3B, which is another work study session to discuss purchasing of fire apparatus. And the Fire Chief Scott Brown is going to kick things off.
So while Chief gets this presentation fired up, I do want to note a couple things that you'll recall that back in, I think it was December 10th of 2019, we had the initial conversation related to this work study and potential purchase of a couple pieces of equipment in the fire department. Over the course of the last month or so, we've had follow-up conversations with respect to additional information, data, looking at all of the information to help guide the decision or make a recommendation. And so you'll note that the recommendation is different than what it was on December 10th, and it changed primarily due to the financial model that had been refined and finalized in that time. So you'll notice that the two recommended actions are included in the staff report include authorize the finance director to pursue financing options with financial institutions for the replacement of fire apparatus. And then secondly, authorize purchasing to solicit bids from fire apparatus manufacturers for the replacement of one engine. You'll recall that in December we talked about two pieces of equipment. In this updated staff report, we have the recommendation being one engine. So again, primarily changed due to the finalization of the financial model. And really that's what drove the conversation and the recommendations that you have before you. So,
thank you, Mr. City Manager, Mayor, members of the council. Good evening. I'm Scott Brown, your fire chief. I'm going to give you just a very brief overview before I hand off to Battalion Chief Lloyd on the policy discussion item before you. Three tenets that we follow: firefighter safety, operational readiness, and fiscal sustainability. I know this is a very sensitive topic right now, and we have been actively involved in discussions with finance and our leadership team in terms of how we might contribute to the overall issue. These are the continued key strategic fiscal priorities for us. Some of those are in progress, some are not, but all represent a significant capital outlay investment in the future. Communications, we're going to talk a little bit about emergency response vehicle needs, safety equipment, and infrastructure. Our fire EMS vehicle replacement plan priorities focus on 4 points: maintain and improve our current reliability of our emergency response delivery, cost effective in concert with our commitment to fiscal sustainability, incorporating new technology and vehicle platforms that suit the mission task of fire EMS that meet or exceed all regulatory requirements and standards for emergency response vehicles. Chief Lloyd will be addressing that. It's in the staff report and give you a little bit more definition on that. Safe to operate. Our current fleet, we have 5 frontline engine companies. We refer to those as Type 1 engine companies. We have a 100-foot truck company, aerial, tractor-drawn aerial. We have squad assigned to the hazardous material team, large pickup utility rescue crew cabs, which you approved as part of this year's budget and are in service, I'm pleased to report, as we speak. Just a quick snapshot of our current vehicle inventory. Engine 2 and 3 are the newest of our fleet. They're approaching 3 years old now. The ones in white are scheduled for future replacement. We've identified Engine 1, 4, and 5. Engine 1 being in need of immediate replacement. Engine 4, I just had a reassessment by our fleet services. He indicates we can get another 2 to 3 years out of Engine 4, and similar for Engine 5. But just to give you a sense of the planning. We do mention the truck. That'll be a discussion item upcoming. Again, our squad medic unit, hazmat, and the pickup utilities all represent the new vehicle inventory that we put into place. And they replace the vehicles, and you show the mileage next to it. So what we have purchased, council has approved previously, but just to give everybody a quick reminder. Battalion Chief Command Vehicle was paid for by Measure U. Our Type 1 engines, replacement for Engine 2 and 3, were both an Indian Gaming Grant and General Fund. Our 3 new F-250 light rescue vehicles, Medic 1 and Medic 2, and a utility were paid by Measure U. 1 F-250 utility was funded out of fund balance from our Vehicle Replacement Fund in General Fund, and 1 Ford F-150 was, for our Emergency Services Coordinator, was General Fund. There is an allotment for that particular category for the emergency services, and that is what paid for that vehicle. We have program replacement for Engine 1 in this fiscal year 1920, Engine 4 fiscal year 2021, and Engine 5 21-22, and the truck company to be determined. We'll talk more about that briefly. And I just make mention the general fund references funding earmarked as part of the Vehicle Replacement Fund. I want to talk briefly about the truck just as part of the background. The deployment analysis, which was conducted, the original analysis, which was basically a SWOT analysis of what we're doing good, what we needed to improve, identified the need to relocate our truck company. So one of the things, this is not in your, I put it up here so instead of reading out of you could see it. One of the original plans before that we were going to bring forward was to purchase a different truck type to accomplish staffing truck service downtown Station 1. That has been identified in both our deployment analysis and our standards of cover community risk reduction study that we needed to locate the truck downtown. We made a determination this year, as you know, when we went through budget planning, that we cannot afford the 9 FTEs that it takes to staff that truck. So we brought that forward and shared with you under the auspices of fiscal sustainability. We could not do that on a go forward. So I directed our command staff to look at different options. That is not on the table tonight. However, the outcome that we still need to achieve is look at how we're going to accomplish getting truck service downtown. This indicated the 2 things that was important to make note of, is that the original report was done prior to having the Measure U funded medic unit at Station 1. It also identified the need to establish truck service within a 2.5 mile radius of the risk, and that is determined to be here downtown. And at the time this report was written, it indicated Station 1's area experienced the highest level of service demand, and it also indicated the current staffing configuration did not lend itself to the cross-staffing model that we currently utilize at Station 4. So it recommended, as part of that study, that we strive to significantly reduce demand at Station 1 in order to cross-staff the truck. That analysis and report indicated cross-staffing the truck could be done in concert with other options as recommended. This is what you've approved. We followed the recommendations for that to occur. You approved funding of a peak activity unit, and that is approximately 3 day a week, 10-hour unit that is staffed part-time through overtime, and you approved funding for that unit as part of the 17-18 fiscal year budget. We did establish second bullet, an alternative response unit. That has been completed. City Council approved funding of Medic 2, which is a 2-person squad, full-time, 24/7, as part of the 18-19 mid-year budget appropriation. Both these units have realized significant improvements and greatly reduced operational workload on Engine 1. In your package that you got, you have a bar chart. And I think it underscores the importance of what a positive impact that is. But what you have in front of you is a bar chart starting from 17 through 20 year to date. And starting in 2017, that was before we had the Medic 1 or peak. We started with a peak activity unit in place. There was no extra resources, and you can see the full burden fell on Engine 1. 2018, we had the peak demand, and you can see that we're starting to see the red representing Medic 1, the blue the engine, that Medic 1 was making a difference in terms of reducing the impact on Engine 1. Go to 2019, and that's a full year now where we had a fully staffed Medic unit. That's the 24/7 medic unit that you've approved, and you can see almost a 4-to-1 positive impact on reducing the net impact on the engine company. And in 2020, obviously it's January, but expect fully that will trend accordingly. So that aside, tonight what you'll be hearing is a request for consideration for funding of the one engine based on the new fiscal reality. I support that. Certainly if we have an opportunity, and if that were present, we purchase 3 because we have a need for 3, but there's a fiscal reality, and I've committed to work as part of that to help solve that problem. Our next steps on the truck, I will be operational outcome directing command staff to develop and implement a transition plan to relocate Truck 1 to Station 1. Truck 1 will be cross-staffed by Engine 1 at Station 1, and that will be operational by April 1, 2020 at 0800. Communicated that with our hospital, received a letter from the hospital KPC management group that indicated wanted an update on where we're at. I briefed them on this plan, the need to change the plan. They were very supportive from a fiscal standpoint, but also appreciated us addressing, at least in the interim, getting a truck downtown to address that. I met with Chief Glenn Patterson yesterday from Cibolo Fire and had discussions on, entertained initial discussions on developing some additional truck capacity in the form, if we get a working fire at the hospital, can we bring them in to help as part of a formal agreement? And we walked out of that meeting very positive. We're working on that as we speak, and I should be in a position to share more with you here in the very near future. We're looking at mutual benefit, not only truck, perhaps some chief officer coverage and things like that, but we need a truck. Obviously, we need trucks, and I think I shared with the mayor, given our primary challenge with the hospital, we do have other mid-rises that are primarily in one's area that we need to address. Trucks is a very important part of the arsenal. All we're doing now is just changing and pivoting the business plan because of the fiscal reality. So with that, if you can hold questions, I'm going to give it to Greg, and he'll introduce the staff report this evening. Thank you.
Right. Good evening, Council, Mayor, staff. Thank you for this opportunity. My job here is just to kind of walk through the report, answer any questions that you may have regarding the financing of the fire apparatus. A lot of what you've heard is there. We have a total of 7 fire engines and 1 aerial truck company, to a total of 8 apparatus that we use to serve our primary mission here within the city. Industry standard for the life of these apparatus are 10 years at a frontline capacity and an additional 5 years in a reserve status. After that time, cost of repairs and downtime outweighs the actual the cost of purchasing of a new equipment. As well as time progresses, new safety features are available, things such as airbags that enhance firefighter safety become available as newer apparatus come, as well as technology. On the second page of the work study, you see an overview of our current fire apparatus, year of manufacturer, their manufacturer's name and where they're currently placed, as well as their age. Just to note that we do have one apparatus that's 21 years old. We have a number of them that are over 15 years. They're past that even reserve state. The mileage is one thing. Those are over-the-road mileage. But what I'd like to highlight as well is one of the things that those fire engines do is when they pull up to a scene for a fire, they stop rolling, but they continue to operate. And those are calculated by engine hours. So the 100,000+ miles that's on the engine is accurate in some ways if you wanted to look at things like transmission, differential, and tires, but they're not accurate when they deal with the engine. The engine actually can run for 4, 6, 8 hours at a time on a fire that continually puts wear and tear on them. And then for those, when they're out of service, then they're not available to serve the public's mission. They carry a wide variety of tools. As a result, their cost is significant. And one of the reasons why we're coming to you with a finance plan is because of the potential for it being fiscally advantageous for the city. Right now, apparatus manufacturers estimate their cost increases every year between 4.5% and 6.5%. That's labor, that's materials, cost of equipment, and then What that does for us is it makes it difficult for us to keep pace with with an apparatus savings plan or something like that, as we currently had. If we are looking at about $745,000 for a fully equipped engine, as the chief was saying, we have 3 that have surpassed that 15-year service life that could be replaced at this time, that would put an excess of $2 million burden. We understand that in this fiscal climate, especially on what we've heard this evening, that that's not feasible, and we're not here or interested in putting any more or putting any pressure on the city or on any of the other departments to do what we need to do. We understand we're a department within the city. We're all on the same team. We all want to function together to make the city move forward in a fiscally sustainable manner. We did have an apparatus replacement fund, and that was something that the city manager mentioned in the previous work study. Just to give you some idea, some of the background, in 1999 it was established fiscal year, and then the recession caused it to not be funded. There was some balance in there, and then in 2015-16, $198,000 was allocated. The following year, $204,000 was allocated, and then the following year, $175,000. The following 2 years, there was no money allocated to that fund, and in that last year, that vehicle fund was then given back to the city to help balance the budget out of that. Regardless, unfortunately, the need still arises to replace our apparatus, and we're looking to do that. We have an apparatus committee in place, and they looked at those apparatus needs, and as a result, their recommendations were the purchase of 3 engines to replace the ones that were greater than 15 years old. As a result of that, we've looked at those models. We started to scale back, and now coming before you with 1. The fiscal impact part of it, 40% of municipalities are starting to finance their apparatus. Current financial rates fall between 3% and 4%, and I believe with the finance director, we were able to look and get an estimate right around 3.1% for a current interest rate. So that falls right within what our speculations are, which is less than the 4.5 to 6.5 annual increase that manufacturers set aside for those apparatus. The nice part with that is that 3.1% interest rate is set every year versus, well, it's 4.5 this year for an increase, or 5.5 or 6, or as you'll see later on, one apparatus manufacturer ended up having to do a 6.8% increase just because of cost. So that makes it very difficult to budget for. And in any kind of environment like this, we want to have those steady numbers. So right now, looking at the finance costs with total sales tax would be $810,000. A phased-in approach, 1 per year for the next 3 years. We would have to amend that with an increase cost each year. That's the phased replacement avoids lump sum expenditures when the apparatus are ready to replace. However, it does mean that when we come back in the next year, it's not going to be the same price. So if we were to finance 2 this year, that would be 1 price versus 1 each year for sequential years. We'd have to account for the annual increase in cost for apparatus. We have apparatus that need replacement in the mileage, and we talked about that. The key to remember is it takes 11 months to construct a piece of this equipment. They're not something that you can go down onto the car lot and buy and just pick one up off of the street. They're all made as a custom type of apparatus, and as we talked about in the December, it's not a customization like we like to think like a hot rod. It's more of a standardization. And so what they do is take what apparatus you currently have, where the equipment's located, so that it's standardized across your department, so that we're not asking our firefighters to look for the chainsaw located in this compartment on this truck. Well, it's in a different compartment on this truck. When the fire is burning and lives are at stake, we want to give them as much advantage as possible. So having a standardized location for equipment puts them in an advantageous position, which ends up, helping the public in the long run. What we do on that note is we look at other cities that have already gone through the process with their apparatus committees. We had San Bernardino County here with their apparatus. We've looked at apparatus from different cities. We had Chula Vista as well. So we're not reinventing the wheel. We're taking what other cities have done, what other departments have done, and then making small minor tweaks so that it works within our city so to give the best advantage to our firefighters. Looking at a 5-year option, at 3.1% interest rate. Currently in this fiscal year, we have $200,000 of Measure U money set aside for apparatus replacement. That would be used as a down payment, or can be used as a down payment. Based on that, we would end up with an annual payment of $175,172 for that first apparatus. And then the idea would be to come back in the second year for another and for a third so that we would be able to bring our apparatus up to that point. It helps reduce repair costs. It also gives us a kind of a steady line item budget, so that's easier for us to budget with finance. The other part of the large scale expenditures is crippling the rest of the city, and we're not interested in doing that. So at that point, I open to any questions that you have regarding our proposal.
Deputy City Clerk, do we have any speaker requests to speak on this item?
There are no requests to speak.
Thank you. I'll bring it back to council. Council have questions, comments?
I guess I get to go first. Thanks for the presentation. Thank you for being a team player for the entire city. I appreciate that. I'm sure the rest of us appreciate that. I do want to point out and give you a kudos to the fact of the Medic 1 for 2019, almost 5,000 calls for service. That would have gone on a fire engine had we not implemented that. So I think we did make a promise that we would try to get less water going to medical emergencies and more medical aid. So great job on that. I think my next question is probably for the finance director as far as the financing portion of this. My first question is, what is our rate of return on money that's invested in our surplus Measure U funds?
Less than 2%.
And you probably can
That is
guess
correct.
where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
So if they're getting quotes for 3.1% for 5 years on an $810,000 purchase, why don't we loan them the money from Measure U at 2.5%? It'll give them a lower payment that they can pay back Measure U over a 5-year period, and the city's making money on its own money instead of giving it to like Bank of America or Engine Finance Company of.
Because it's already a Measure U expenditure, so we can't borrow our own money to pay it. You would either have to use, I think last time we talked
Why
about
not?
using, because,
The money's
Yeah,
just
and
sitting there in the bank.
okay, but in that,
Take the money out to pay for it, and then as money gets allocated to them, it just comes back
right,
on a,
so
you kind of know where I'm going.
there's two options. Last time we had this discussion, we talked about borrowing the money from, excuse me, the fire diff fund, which has money set aside for a future fire station in McSweeney. That would somewhat make sense because then they would get the rate of return. If you're going to use Measure U money to pay for it, then the way you would have the best outcome is to just pay cash and not finance it, because now you're not paying interest. Yes, that is your best option if you want to stay within Measure U money.
I get that. But if we still charge them a rate, that's just gonna be whatever payment they would have been making out of their budget, it's just gonna go right back in plus interest.
But it's using the same money.
Well, yes and no, it's using current money to be paid back with future money.
But it's coming out of the exact same pocket. So how?
Well, it's coming out of one pocket to
Yeah,
go to the other. It's staying in the same
Yeah,
account, but on your accounting budget line items, it's on your general ledgers, it's going from one ledger spot to another. So, yes, no, maybe so.
My recommendation is no, that's not the best
It would be
option,
cheaper than paying 3.1%.
except that you have all of it's like a circular transaction to do everything out of the same fund. And so now you're paying staffing to process a circular transaction that could have been avoided
And do
altogether.
this, pay cash for it, and then reduce their allocation from general fund by what the payments would have been over a 5-year period.
That I could do.
That's all I got for now.
Yeah, the only thing I would say is I'm not interested in financing at 3.1% because we're going to rob ourselves. We already can't invest our money for that. Yeah, it's ridiculous. Yeah, and we have all this money sitting in the bank.
You and I know the financing part. We know it's being called. Everything over 3% has been called or will be called very soon. Thank you for the presentation. I do have a couple comments. And I agree with the three principles that you go with: firefighter safety, getting the job done, financial, sustainability and accountability. The breakdown on the maximum allowable apparatus cost, including outfitting. I always have heartburn with outfitting. Is everything, when you get a new fire engine, everything new has to go on it, or are there things that can come from the old fire engine?
So the answer to your question in a word is yes, can you? But the better question is should you? Because what happens when you do that? So that frontline apparatus that now goes into a reserve status that you're replacing, if you pull all of the equipment off of that apparatus does not have the equipment to be available for two things. One, if the frontline engine goes down, then it goes from a 30-minute process for them to move into a backup to a 3-hour process, because now they got to move all the equipment over. More importantly, if we have a disaster and we need surge capacity, so there's a fire in town, an earthquake or something like that, that apparatus isn't as effective of a piece of equipment to the firefighters because it doesn't have all the equipment on it. So it's by putting it fully equipped, we are actually engineering an equipment replacement into our apparatus replacement. And so, and then not only that, all of the manufacturer mounts become covered under warranty. So all of a sudden we start moving things around and we start mounting things on our own. It doesn't necessarily void the manufacturer's warranty, but if they break, then there are costs to replace. If they break earlier on, then that falls under part of that piece of equipment that's covered by the manufacturer. So it's a short-term possible savings, but with some long-term repercussions in it that could far outweigh that.
Thank you. I really appreciate that answer.
You're welcome.
And I also have a question for Lorena. Of the 8.75% sales tax, do we get our 2% back? Okay.
Sales tax is always at the delivery site. So yes, we do.
Okay, very good. I thought we would, but I needed that assurance. Go ahead. Something else.
On Linda's question, so I think you were probably thinking, like, if we got a new truck, that we wouldn't keep that in reserve.
Well, how many reserves? I mean, buying one new engine
Right.
for Station 1, which definitely has the highest demand of anything.
Right.
You take the current engine 1 and move it into the yard at Station 4. That's in my mind, that's where it's going. But there's already one there,
Right.
or two there. What happens to those? Can any of that equipment be then brought forward, or is it surplus that we would need in an emergency?
So, Ed, one of those three, at least for currently right now. So, engine 1, as you saw in this statistics in previous, has a lot of miles on it. and has a lot of wear and tear on it. And we would look between that engine and the two current reserves that we have and probably seek to surplus one of those, and look at our current reserves and see where they're short in equipment and be able to move some of those things over. So there would be some benefit out of it that would be helpful. And it's not that we're just going to surplus all of that old equipment. We certainly are going to look at it, be fiscally responsible with it, and say, if I can use this, if there's serviceable life left on that piece of equipment, it's going to get used. Sometimes we have equipment that breaks, not only fire apparatus that breaks. So we do carry some level of reserve equipment that's maintained by our crews, by our staff, so that if something breaks, they can immediately be replaced. It's, we really function on a low or no out of service time. So if something breaks, we need to be able to replace it as quickly as possible because, I wish we could say, well, the disaster will happen at this time.
That was my question.
Okay.
If we were going to get rid of something, or if it was that bad, or if we were just going to keep it in reserve. So.
Well, it would be nice, I think our goal, and the chief can speak better on this, that 2 to 3 reserve apparatus would certainly be optimal. That works for a surge capacity. That also works if we're responding on mutual aid, to be a partner within the operational area, so that we can make sure that we backfill our own areas. Unfortunately, we're in a with that first piece of apparatus, we're in a dire strait. I don't want to be straight forth with you and say, we have at least one engine that definitely needs, if we could replace it today, it would definitely be great. So we would look at that and say, hey, maybe on this round we wouldn't be able to go to that 3 surge capacity, but we would have that discussion between with fleet maintenance and and that cost effectiveness. And we say, hey, if we keep this as a reserve, they might say, okay, that's fine, or that's going to cost us more than really we want to expend to keep it as a reserve status.
Our goal is to have 3 units as reserve, and the surge capacity is really the underlying outcome we want to try to achieve for everything that Greg just brought up. So we have a ready reserve fleet, ready to go, turnkey. We need to add additional capacity. It's good to go. Right now we have 2. We want to have 3, and that process that we're going to go through will weed out, what is the best candidate for that. There'll be surplus. And again, that's a whole different process, but our goal is 3. That's what I'd like to see in place.
Thank you.
Mike, you had another
Yeah, I
question?
just have one more question. If we know that we're going to be purchasing 3 over a period of time, and have we looked into other agencies that are currently looking to make a purchase that we can maybe piggyback on their contract with? And would we be, if we know that for sure that we're going to buy one this year, one next year, and one the following year, can we just get them under contract so that we can lock in a price now and say, hey, we want delivery on one now, we want delivery on the next one, and we want delivery on the next one, and then when we get delivery, we pay.
Absolutely. Well, the person that is not here, obviously most importantly finance, but our purchasing person is in the loop with this, and we do piggyback on with some of the government piggyback contracts. I don't know the specifics of being able to fix a price for a future purchase, but that's certainly something that we would bundle that 3-year deal into something. I don't know what that looks like.
I think if we can look at something like that and maybe lock into a better price today, because we know that things are getting more expensive, and say, hey, we're going to guarantee that we're going to make these purchases, and you guarantee us a price now, so that we can plan ahead for that.
The one thing I do got to add, though, is the financial commitment that goes and impacts the financial model. So what does that mean in future years? What do those future expenditures look like? What does it do to the fund balance? Because those are significant purchases. So we would want to look at the financial ramifications of that and then bring that back to council.
I think this might be a benefit for that, because if we already know what that fixed cost is going to be, we can calculate that fixed cost into that model.
On the other side of the financial component of it is, would we overextend our capacity to be able to pay for other services in public safety with that. So it becomes the question of, what's the council's comfort level with making those commitments in future years for those purchases? What does that look like for future years' budget? And what does that look like for the rest of the financial model? So we would want to make sure that the council had all that information before they committed to
That would
expenditure
depend,
like that.
right, which fund, and if we finance or pay cash,
Correct. All those things
Okay.
would be impacted by that.
got a discount.
In your packet, Mayor and Council, there's also the spending plan that's been updated for you that shows you everything that's been, yes, and you have that. So hopefully that gives you the complete picture. Thank you for,
And
Sorry,
Chief
Mayor.
Lloyd, thank you very much for your presentation. And I wanted to touch on a couple of things that we kind of went over quickly, but in my mind, it factors into your concept of firefighter safety and fiscal sustainability. And that is what you mentioned about the changing call for service dynamic out of Station 1 with the medic unit being there 24/7. You mentioned, I think at a previous council meeting, a statistic, I don't recall off the top of my head, but a very high percentage of our calls for service are EMS calls, emergency medical. Looking downrange, and we get this question all the time in the public, when I call 911 because I'm having chest pains, why do I get a fire engine that shows up? And my answer is always then, well, that's what they drive. And we have paramedics, so the important thing is not how they arrive, is that the right people are arriving. And clearly, I think from a financial model and fiscal sustainability, it's much more cost effective to drive a utility truck to a scene. It can get there quicker than an engine, and it's a lot easier to maintain. So looking downstream as far as the service demand on the entire fire department, are we anticipating, I know we've talked a lot about emergency medical dispatch, and that's a critical component of it, because they'll be hopefully filtering out a lot of those calls so they're not actually physically responding.
So, Mayor, thank you for that comment. 82% of our operational impact emergency calls are EMS related. So our strategy has been straightforward. We need to reduce that demand. 25 to 30% of our 17,000 calls per year that we run should not come through 911. That's both a system issue. It's the changes that occurred in healthcare. We need to address that. So we're moving forward. I just updated our city manager on an EMD plan. We're working collaboratively with the PD on implementing that. We have hired 3 dispatchers. We have 1 call taker in background right now as we help build that force structure for our dispatch. We have an implementation revised date of June 9, so we're moving in the EMD realm. With your help and support, we've put Medic 1 into service. You've funded the peak demand unit. Those strategies are absolutely key. And in the staff report, and I don't recall that we went over that, there is a paragraph line item for future discussions on just to the point you made. With EMS being the primary task, we need to look at the vehicle type. You took that first step in supporting us going to the concept of the 2-person medic unit. And I think that that's very important, and we've included that in the staff report for your review. So when we come back, those discussions are going to center around what is the right vehicle type. All 5 fire stations are fully staffed. You have, a fire term, you have an anchor point. Each have a fire engine. They're fully staffed. And so that part of the mission task is taken care of. Now we got to look at dealing with capacity. And I think, to your point, alternate vehicles that have been identified in both our formal studies, whether they're a squad and to Mayor Pro Tem a motorcycle or some other type of vehicle type, that is those are the contemporary things that are evolving and building these systems. So I appreciate you acknowledging that. 82%, that's our.
And I'd like to echo the comments that have already been made. We appreciate the team approach to this. It would be nice to be able to go forward and replace all of the aging equipment in one fell swoop. We know that that's not a fiscal reality for us, but it's worth endeavoring toward. Carly, General.
I have another comment for you. It's often asked at my coffees about the engines responding to medical aids versus the medic unit and et cetera. And we brought up at this last fire at the Alessandro incident, the engine 1 responded from a medical aid to that fire. And because we're staffed with it, that must have meant that the medic unit was already on a call. So then engine 1 was on a call, and it responded ready to go. So it responds with an engine because it wouldn't have had time to run back home to trade vehicles and then show up to that apartment fire. So that's an excellent example when people ask you. They were ready. They just have to be ready.
Thank you, Mayor and Council, for your support. Appreciate it.
Before we wrap up, we do have 2 recommendations that we would like to get direction on. And I'll state them out loud so everyone knows what they are. Authorize the Finance Director to pursue financing options with financial institutions for the replacement of fire apparatus, and 2, authorize purchasing to solicit bids from fire apparatus manufacturers for the replacement of 1 engine. So we're looking for direction on that.
I'll make a motion. I move that we pay cash for the replacement of 1 engine in order to save over $200,000. And then they can start their bid process, hoping that they piggyback, like Mike said, on somebody else's bid. Did you want to make the motion?
So what we might be able to do, if the council would like, is assuming that the council wants both of the recommended items, the council would ultimately need to authorize the purchase at a future council meeting. So we could theoretically get all the info with respect to financing, and then at that point the council would either direct us to use cash or finance the purchase. So we could do that if the council would like.
First, yeah. All right. I move to recommend the actions that are recommended.
And was one of those to use gift funds?
We could look at those options. Yeah.
Give them all 3 options.
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay, so I have a motion from Carly, basically, of the recommended action, and a second by Michael. Please vote. And that passes unanimously, 4-0.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that brings us to the adjournment of our work study, and I see it's 6:51, so we will recess and reconvene at 7.